It's the summer of 2015, and a businessman is walking down the street in El Salvador when two young men suddenly appear in front of him. He desperately begs for his life, pleading that he has young children, but his pleas fall on deaf ears. One of the men pulls out a pistol and shoots him, first in the shoulder, then in the stomach, finally twice in the head. His crime? Refusing to pay an extortion debt to a gang. The amount? Just $21. Fast forward to December 2022, when a man sits alone in a dimly lit chapel, perched on a wooden church pew. He clutches a picture of his daughter, a psychology student known by the alias Martyr, close to his chest as he struggles to hold back tears. Marta isn't dead, but she's been in prison for 6 months without having committed any crime. Her current whereabouts remain unknown, and these stories leave us with a pressing question. What happened? How did El Salvador go from having one of the highest murder rates in the world to one of the lowest in such a short amount of time? How did the government transform a nation plagued by chaos into a place where order and peace have been restored for the first time in a generation? El Salvador holds a dark secret. Deep in the country, hidden in the middle of the desert, stands a hulking steel and concrete fortress, a vault where El Salvador locks away its most dangerous criminals and throws away the key. Today, we're going to tell you a story about gang violence and one man's crusade against it. A story of how the man built a monument to his crusade in the form of one of the most secure prisons on earth, and how ordinary people have gotten caught up in it. This is the prison from which no one has ever been released. A local police officer once said, quote, "Not even El Chapo could escape from there. It's where the worst of the worst go to rot. The highest security complex this side of the U.S. border. The Alcatraz of South America, CECOT. CECOT stands for the Center of Confinement for Terrorism. To grasp its significance, we need to understand the sheer scale of this massive steel complex. Built in the latter half of 2022, it began receiving its first guest in February of 2023, and the numbers are staggering. The complex itself covers 57 acres, but the surrounding grounds patrolled by police and the Army span an astounding 407 acres. That's 2.5 times the size of Disneyland, and about 1,000% less fun. It's one of the largest and most secure prison facilities in the Americas. From the outside in, CECOT is fortified by multiple layers of security. First, there are the cells, 32 to each cell block or module. There are 8 modules, each locked, guarded, and held in a separate sector, bordered by electrified chain link fences, barbed wire, and patrolling guards. Beyond that are 4-meter high walls of 60-centimeter thick concrete topped with barbed wire and multiple guard towers. And then there's the main prison wall, an 11-meter high barrier taller than a London bus that stretches over 2 kilometers around the compound's perimeter, with 19 guard towers housing armed guards. If you somehow manage to get past all of that, you'd find yourself in 400 acres of government land with the Army and police patrolling several more layers of perimeter security. That makes around 7 circles of security. Hell itself, as they say, has 9. CECOT was built in Tekaluca, I know I butchered that, Tekaluca, 74 kilometers, 46 miles southeast of San Salvador, almost exactly in the center of the country, in the middle of a desert, miles from any civilian settlements. El Salvador's previous experience with urban prisons showed that their issues often spilled over into local communities. Here, isolation is a strategic design feature meant to protect those communities. The prison's infrastructure is entirely self-contained and independent of the national grid, with its own wells for water and a substation to generate electricity. Even if the rest of El Salvador was somehow destroyed tomorrow, CECOT would still function. It requires a plentiful supply of electricity too, as the entire complex is lit up like a Christmas tree. Every square inch of the exterior is covered in spotlights. After all, gang members can't hide in the dark, if there is no dark. There are still several unknowns when it comes to officially established information about the facility. We know it's energy independent, but for obvious security reasons, the exact nature of that infrastructure remains unclear. We don't know the total number of cameras or the total number of staff. Perhaps most importantly, we don't know what it costs to build, especially given the speed of its construction. Estimates suggest there are thousands of cameras, far more than hundreds typically found in prisons of a smaller size, and security around the world, making CECOT a surveillance outlier. It's pushing the boundaries of what's feasible and even practical in modern jails. The staff is estimated to number a few thousand, which, given the size of the facility, isn't actually that many. CECOT's full capacity is reported to hold 40,000 inmates. For comparison, Rikers Island in New York can house 20,000 inmates and employs around 10,000 staff. Those who designed and built CECOT claim that everything was done to global international standards, as shown during the Mexican president's tour of the prison on his YouTube channel. A lot of politics is indeed bizarre. There's no doubt that CECOT has been influenced by some of the world's most secure prisons, like ADX Florence Supermax in Colorado. ADX Florence cost the U.S. government around $60 million to build in 1994, but that facility is designed to hold under 500 inmates at its absolute maximum, not 40,000. Given that CECOT's main compound is 20 acres larger than ADX Florence, it's primed to house 80 times the number of inmates and was built state-of-the-art 3 decades later. So it's reasonable to estimate that CECOT's cost significantly dwarfs that of Florence, and well, most other prisons on Earth. The cells inside each module are a little more than concrete boxes. They have thick, reinforced bars on the front-facing walls and metal mesh ceilings for constant monitoring by armed guards in the gangways above. Each cell is fitted with 2 concrete toilets and 2 concrete basins, though the water is turned on and off from outside the cell. The main floor space is filled with quadruple deck metal frames that form the inmates' beds. No mattresses, sheets, or pillows are allowed, as even those can be fashioned into weapons. The entire complex holds 256 cells, with around 156 prisoners per cell. The Washington Post reports that at 98 people per acre, CECOT is designed to be one of the most densely populated prisons on Earth. It's a tight squeeze, especially when temperatures can reach 35 degrees Celsius with little ventilation. The cells don't have any windows, and as far as Salvadoran authorities are concerned, they don't need any. The design of the modules allows natural light to enter during the day, and fluorescent lighting is as ubiquitous inside as it is outside. These lights remain on 24/7, even while inmates are trying to sleep, ensuring constant surveillance. The only exception is isolation. Solitary confinement cells are small, pitch-black concrete boxes with a concrete slab for a bed and a concrete toilet. All in all, CECOT is as well equipped, if not better equipped, than most prisons on Earth, even for the staff. A key element of the design was to restore the dignity associated with being a guard at CECOT. Guards are provided with a safe place to eat a hot meal, a comfortable place to rest, a recreational area, and even a gym. The Salvadoran government aimed to transform the previously skeptical perception of its security services into one of respect. The prisoners, of course, are not extended that courtesy, and just in case they get upset about it, CECOT is fully equipped to handle any issues. The prison has an armory stacked with rifles, riot gear, and megaphones. Armed sharpshooters, especially in vantage areas, are a constant presence. And if the prison officers ever need help, they can call in the Salvadoran police and army patrolling the exterior. What's more, El Salvador's 6th Infantry Brigade is located only 20 kilometers away. The compound already has a fleet of vehicles, including a helicopter, and the open layout ensures that multiple helicopters can land on the ground if necessary. If you know nothing about El Salvador, you might think this level of security is overkill. I mean, who are the monsters locked up in such an inescapable place? Why would a country need to build such a massive complex for them? Well, to understand that, we need to delve into the recent history that led to the creation of CECOT. To understand what's happening in El Salvador today, and what led to the construction of one of the most secured facilities on Earth, we must first travel back to 1980s Los Angeles, where El Salvador's gang problems began. During the Salvadoran Civil War from 1980 to 1992, many citizens fled to the U.S. to escape violence and persecution. This led to a community of Salvadorans living in Los Angeles. Some of these refugees banded together to protect themselves against the native gangs of LA. One Salvadorian gang was known as Barrio 18 or the 18th Street Gang. I'm going to butcher these. The other was known as MS-13. Both gangs became bitter rivals. Today, both are infamous for their brutality, indifference to human suffering, and involvement in a wide range of criminal activities. By the 1990s, the situation had become so severe that the U.S. government began deporting dangerous Salvadoran gang members back to their homeland. But the Civil War had devastated El Salvador. Its infrastructure lay in ruins, and there was little security to protect civilians. This environment was ideal for the repatriated gang members who were now skilled at setting up and running criminal organizations. The New American Story Project reports that as many as 4,000 gang members were sent back to a nation unequipped to handle them. As a result, the gangs grew in power, filling the vacuum left by the weakened state. Over a generation, El Salvador became gripped by a cycle of extreme violence, extortion, trafficking, and worse, as gangs fought each other in the state for control. The government couldn't contain the violence, and El Salvador's murder rate skyrocketed to 103 per 100,000 people in 2015. In other words, in 2015, 1 in every 972 people was murdered, all in a nation with a population smaller than New York City. The prison system quickly became overwhelmed, and the state was left with no choice but to strike unfavorable deals with the gangs in an attempt to quell the violence. For example, the Barrios Penal Center, a prison in the capital, was exclusively for MS-13 gang members. The Guardian reports that 2,600 inmates had such total control over the place, the guards were too afraid to enter. Inmates found ways to access nearly anything they wanted, including drugs, weapons, computers, phones, PlayStations, even sex workers. While this may sound like a good time for the inmates, it didn't exactly scream punishment. And one man in particular agreed. He believed the gangs had it far too good for far too long, and he vowed to do something about it. Enter El Salvador's newest president, Nayib Bukele. He was previously the owner of a marketing company before deciding to get involved in politics. He won the 2019 presidential election with 53% of the vote. His anti-corruption, anti-establishment ideology, alongside the slogan, "There's enough money when no one steals," clearly resonated with the Salvadoran electorate. Simply put, he was a breath of fresh air compared to the main political parties that had overseen the nation's descent into chaos. El Salvador needed something new, and he was it. In 2019, he set out to reclaim the nation from the gangs, launching his administration's territorial control plan. Previous Salvadoran regimes had often preached security and control as part of the nation's ongoing iron fist policy towards gang violence, which had emerged in the 2000s. He was about to show the gangs just how hard that fist could hit. The government first took back control of the prisons. They installed phone signal blockers and gave phone companies ultimatums to shut off service in certain areas completely. They raided the prisons, seizing any contraband they could find, and ended the policy of prison segregation. At first glance, putting violent groups who hate each other together in a concrete box might seem counterintuitive. However, despite concerns that this would only ramp up the violence, the gangs opted for a truce. Being locked up together forced them to coexist. If it were kill on sight all the time, the gangs would have quickly torn each other apart, which was not in their best interest. A nonviolent truce made the move look like a masterstroke by the president. But while he had the upper hand, bureaucratically, the gangs still held significant control in other areas of the nation and continued to make their presence known. The president's policies had brought down El Salvador's murder rate significantly, but violent outbursts were still common. On March 27, 2022, the BBC reported that 62 people were murdered in El Salvador within 24 hours. This president had enough. The gloves were about to come off once and for all. The government declared a state of exception, initially for 30 days, but it has been extended repeatedly and remains in force to this day. The emergency decree suspended various constitutional rights and granted law enforcement special powers to make arrests without evidence. It also allowed them to hold prisoners for longer than the ordinary limit of 72 hours without seeing a judge. Travel restrictions were implemented in known gang-heavy areas. Some assemblies were banned, and the government granted itself access to citizens' private communications. And of course, arrests were made. A lot of them. By 2024, only 2 years into the operation, over 88,000 people had been arrested in El Salvador. However, according to Human Rights Watch, even the Salvadoran police themselves state that around 1 in every 6 people arrested is innocent. The regime was arresting so many people every month that by the end of 2022, the already overcrowded and overwhelmed Salvadoran prison system was faring even worse. The regime knew they needed a new prison to match their new policy, a shining monument to national security. If the gangs were bad, the government was going to be worse. So CECOT was born. All right, we've told you why it was built and what you'd expect to find if you visited. But what is life really like for the prisoners at CECOT? Who are they? What have they done to get there? And how does CECOT handle? Well, this could probably be broken down into 2 main areas: prison policy and inmate policy. Prison policy concerns the facility itself and its staff. CECOT is designed with several systems to ensure smooth operation. Guards are paid fairly, well-equipped, and well-trained. They regularly conduct exercises to practice responding to potential disturbances, including scenarios where they must assault certain sections of the prison. You can see a demonstration of this during the president's tour of the facility, where riot gear-clad police stack up 4 to 1 man against cell doors, while a squad of marksmen sweeps the corridor to prevent inmates from colluding against them. Counterintelligence teams constantly assess the mood on the ground. One of the most important elements of prison security policy is the strict control of contraband. To ensure that inmates won't be procuring PlayStations or partying with sex workers, everyone who enters the prison must pass through full-body airport-style X-ray scanners and undergo manual frisks. Moreover, any staff member can select any specific inmate or even group of inmates to be searched. The goal is to ensure there's nothing to hide and nowhere to hide it. Even the more administrative aspects of prison policy are crucial to operations. Booking inmates into a digital system ensures the state has a record of who these people are, why they're there, and once they're in the system, there's no way out. As much as we love to delve deeper into the intricacies of prison administration policy, we actually want you to finish this video. So let's move swiftly on to inmate policy. What rules do the prisoners here have to follow? For starters, they're controlled at all times. When outside their cells, unless in large groups where they're made to sit body to body in long lines, leg shackles are common. Prisoners are placed in irons when they're transported anywhere within the prison, which mostly means being taken to isolation or sentencing. Every prisoner has a shaved head or buzz cut and is issued the same white boxer shorts and t-shirt combo. Prisoners spend the vast majority of their time in the 156-man cells that we previously discussed, with the metal shelving beds and the concrete toilet. Talking among prisoners is discouraged, although prison officials recognize the difficulty of policing such rules, which is why the counterintelligence team is essential. When we said prisoners stay in their cells most of the time, we weren't exaggerating. There are no family visits to the prison, likely due to the risk of contraband being smuggled in, so prisoners have a lot of downtime. When it's mealtime, food is delivered to their cell, and they eat it with their hands. Utensils are forbidden. Would you trust an MS-13 gang leader with a plastic fork? Neither would I. It's reported that for recreation, prisoners are exercised in the corridor for 30 minutes each day. This, combined with the bright lights at night, is enough to keep prisoners tired and unstimulated, with very little opportunity to build fitness. One of the exceptions to leaving the cell is for sentencing, but even then, prisoners don't leave CECOT. Instead, digital hearings are conducted with inmates placed in a room with a screen. A key element of eradicating gang activity is removing the threat of retaliation during legal proceedings. A remote digital hearing physically prevents the inmate from threatening the judge or the witnesses. The presidential tour of CECOT did show where prisoners would be put to work, building and making items like chairs and woven goods. However, reports that inmates are only let out of their cells for 30 minutes per day for exercise contradict this idea, so it's unclear whether this is an envisioned future strategy or if something was lost in translation regarding how prisoners would be put to work. Given the level of security at CECOT, allowing convicts to build anything seems ill-advised. This is a place that denies inmates access to cutlery. It might be unwise to hand them angle grinders and sewing machines. Thus far, the prison and inmate policy at CECOT, along with its onion-like layers of security, have made it impossible for anyone to escape successfully, nor is anyone likely to escape anytime soon. Those who go to CECOT go for good. The BBC reports that Salvadoran authorities do not expect prisoners to ever be released, as the inmates held there are simply too dangerous to reintegrate into society. So who are the people that El Salvador is so afraid of that they lock them in a vault forever and throw them? Well, in short, they're the worst of the worst. The identity of those currently at CECOT aren't revealed to the public, but the facility is designed to house the very worst that Salvadoran gangs have to offer. This includes key personnel responsible for running the gangs, treasurers, communication heads, and both national and regional gang leaders. This list likely includes enforcers, extortionists, torturers, and hitmen. This is not a good place to wind up, and yet it is believed that up to 1 in 6 of the thousands of people arrested by the government is completely innocent. As we mentioned in the introduction, people are disappearing and their family members don't know where they are. If the police suspect someone of committing a severe enough crime or being affiliated enough with the gangs, there's a very real chance that completely innocent people with extraordinary bad luck could one day find themselves in CECOT forever. So what comes of all this? What is the legacy of this super prison? Well, like many things in this world, it's complicated. We're going to run through both sides of the argument, and you can decide for yourself which is right. Undoubtedly, there's a bad legacy associated with CECOT, a legacy of missing people, of one form of extreme violence replacing another, of an increasingly undemocratic nation that solves its problems through human rights abuses and unreasonable force. Now, don't get me wrong, the vast majority of prisoners in El Salvador's system, not just CECOT, are unequivocally violent gang members who had a hold on the country for too long. But, excuse me, does that justify potential throwing innocent people behind bars without due process? Does it justify torture? Does it justify extrajudicial killing? What about someone like Murta? Is having her and others disappear into the system indefinitely seen by the government as the price of freedom for the nation? The human rights organization Humanitarian Legal Relief released a report in April 2024 stating that 241 people are confirmed to have died in Salvadoran prisoners since the war, though the actual figure is likely higher as this only accounts for confirmed cases. According to the NGO's report, 44% of these deaths were due to violence or serious torture. 29% were due to a lack of medical attention. Now, we're not trying to say spare a thought for the poor MS-13 hitmen, as these guys are the worst of the worst. One could argue that the state has a responsibility to care for its citizens, even those who have committed the most heinous crimes. The state has to do better than those it convicts. It's not fair, but that is true law and order. With an innocent arrest rate of 1 in 6, according to the Salvadoran police, it's undoubtable that some of the people in the prison system, and perhaps some of whom have died or suffered abuse, may well have been completely innocent. Whether the president's regime likes it or not, whether their cause is righteous or not, they have innocent blood on their hands, no matter how many criminals they lock away. Whether the ends justify the means, well, we'll just have to leave that up to you. Critics of CECOT are far from limited to one NGO, though. The BBC has reported that opponents of the president have described CECOT as a, quote, a black hole of human rights. Similarly, Miguel Serre, a former member of the UN Subcommittee for the Prevention of Torture, described it as, quote, a concrete and steel pit used to dispose of people without formally applying the death penalty. Amnesty International states that El Salvador is experiencing a systematic policy of torture towards all these detained under the state of emergency on suspicion of being gang members. Families who maintain their loved ones' innocence have reported family members being taken from their homes without being shown an arrest warrant. From there, they were transported directly to detention centers or jails before being subjected to group online hearings along with dozens of other detainees. In those hearings, the judge would order pretrial detention while the prosecutor's office investigated whether there was evidence for a formal charge, a process that the BBC states can last for months or even years. Their cause is just until it's your door, they're kicking down in the middle of the night. CECOT is a hammer, which makes every criminal a nail. But we'd be remiss for not talking about how much better El Salvador is for the state stepping in. You can never condone the humanitarian abuses in El Salvador, no matter whether a person is innocent or guilty. However, the state of exception and the territorial control plan do appear to be working. The fact is, the administration has taken dangerous criminals off the streets and has lowered the murder rate in El Salvador from one of the highest in human history to one of the lowest on earth in a remarkably short period. No matter which way you slice it, despotic, undemocratic, unhumanitarian, that is results. That's why the legacy of a place like CECOT is so complicated so early in its life. From a societal perspective, it's irrational for the state to have taken such decisive action. The average Salvadoran citizen previously had to pay protection money through extortion to avoid getting killed. Now the streets are safer again. One citizen told BBC, "Before we lived in fear, not anymore." For all the humanitarian discussion, El Salvador is already benefiting from this change. The USDA Foreign Agricultural Service stated that in August 2023, El Salvador received 25% more foreign visitors than in 2019. The rise in tourism, in turn, strengthens the nation's economy, giving it a route back to prosperity. El Salvador, before 2019, was somewhat of a basket case, a society gripped by existential violence, extortion, and fear. Another person was reported by the BBC as saying, quote, "This place was not safe at all until the president did that," referring to the state of exception. The state, even if spectacularly heavy-handed, has upheld a moral principle that Salvadoran citizens should not suffer for the gang's violence. And what did it cost? An expensive prison, a few constitutional rights, and a signature. Ultimately, the people in El Salvador agreed. A CID Gallup poll of 1,200 citizens in January 2024 showed a 92% favorability rate for the president. The self-proclaimed coolest dictator ever has stood by his staunch approach, tweeting that all the human rights NGOs know that we are going to wipe out these bloody murderers and their collaborators. We will put them in prison, and they will never get out. Salvadoran Justice and Public Security Minister Gustavo Villatoro stated, "We are eliminating this cancer from our society." This is how the Salvadoran government justifies its actions. They are cutting out a tumor. When you cut out a tumor, you have to get it all, even if that means losing some healthy tissue too, to save the rest of the body. The situation for El Salvador was untenable for decades. The violence could not go on. No matter what they did, El Salvador was not going to legislate or negotiate its way out of it. After all, it had tried, and it had failed. When every other tool in your toolbox was taken by gang members, sometimes the hammer is all you've got left. So where does that leave CECOT and El Salvador now? Well, the culture of the country is changing. People are safer, but the state is a force to be feared. There's a new status quo in El Salvador, one where the state sits at the head of the table while the gang members are sent to bed with no supper. El Salvador will be predisposed to authoritarian rule if the state of exception never ends. But the Salvadoran people don't seem to mind, as many feel they are safe for the first time in decades. 2024 election in February saw the president reelected in a landslide victory. As El Salvador forges a path on the world stage, quite unlike any other, remember what was left behind. All the way in the middle of, I'm going to butcher the city again, in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, CECOT will still be there. As an omnipotent monument to the state security victory. The message is clear. Best behave yourself because you don't want to end up there. And that is our episode this week 4. Thanks so much for watching The Dark Rooms. Let me know your thoughts on this topic in the comment section below. And as always, if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/LarryMLease. As always, your support helps the channel grow, help create equipment, bring in new hosts, be able to pay them, and take this show on the road. With that, thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.